music? Well, it's critical listening. All right. And I actually feel like critical listening has become a lost art of sorts. And critical listening is actually really simple. All you have to do is take some time to really listen into the song. Not just, sit back and listen to the melody and the lyrics and all the stuff on a superficial level, but actually listen to the depth of the song. And think of it like this. Here's a great analogy. If you're hanging out by a pool, all right, you haven't jumped in the pool, you're just hanging out with some friends. You look over at the pool, it's the sun's glistening off it, and it's refreshing and it's relaxing just to, be out by the pool. But you haven't actually jumped into the pool. You're experiencing the pool on a very superficial level, right? You're just there and you're seeing the top of it. But when you jump in the pool and you go underwater, you're fully immersed in the whole experience of really swimming in a pool, right? And that's really what critical listening is to music. Okay, so when we are critically listening, what we're doing is we're really listening through the surface of the song, and we're listening into the depth of the production and the instrumentation and the mixing. And what's interesting about music is that when you really focus on critically listening to a song, you'll find that songs and great songs and great mixes have depth, they have height to them, and then they have width. We're all familiar with width because of panning and stereo, but we also have to keep in mind that there's depth and we have height, okay? And there are certain elements that we have to, utilize to get our mixes at that level. And one of the best things we can do is just to sit and listen to other songs that we really, really, really enjoy and analyze all the instruments in those songs and what's happening with them, how they're actually being treated in the mix, okay? So what I've done is I've created a worksheet for you, which you can download below this video. And let's take a look at it really quickly. You'll see at the top of the worksheet here, we have song title. You can just fill in the song. And then we have 5 columns for intro, verses, choruses, bridge, and then outro. And then on the left-hand side, we have various instrument groupings. Okay, we have a percussion group, fretted instrument group, keys group, a vocal group, and then just miscellaneous group. All right. So let's just talk about, for example, the drums and the percussion. So the way that you're going to start critically listening to a song and really dive into the production of it is you're going to pick one instrument and you're just going to start with the kick drum, all right? And you're going to listen to just the kick drum through the entire song. And you may find a lot of things that you had no idea you were going to discover in this process. You may find that maybe in the verses, the kick drum level is really low, and when it gets to the chorus, the kick drum level gets raised up. Well, that's a great mix technique to store away in your mind, so that when it comes to choruses, maybe we just boost some levels of certain instruments to really make those choruses hit hard. A great example of this, by the way, I'm just going to go back in time a little bit, but a great example of this is Van Halen's "Jump." If you listen to that song, we've all heard it a zillion times. But if you listen to the verse, there's a kick drum in it, but it's very low. It's like they basically muted the kick drum, and you're only hearing it through the overheads and the room microphone. But when it gets to that pre-chorus, they unmute it and it just starts hitting you in the chest. And it really raises that section of the song, okay? So, just studying kick drums for a second or two, really a couple minutes, you can learn a lot in how to actually produce a kick drum and how to actually mix it into a track that gives a track dynamics. That's a great example of a track that has great dynamics, really just from the kick drum. Another thing that you may learn is that, especially with programmed drums, the kick drum sounds may change from the verse to the chorus. That's another example. And that happens a lot also with snare drums. Okay, so if we go on to the next instrument here in their critical listening worksheet, we just listen to the snare drum all the way through a song. You may discover, like I said, that snare drums change from section to section. A lot of times you do hear that, especially now with a lot of programmed songs. But on top of that, we want to really start listening to the depth. Okay, so let's listen to the actual snare drum. And does it have a trail behind it? Is it just a crack, or does it have a crack with a long, like a reverb trail, like a ka, right? Well, that's how we start getting the depth in our mixes, by those time-based effects like reverbs and delays. So if you're listening to a snare drum and you're just really focusing in on that for 3 or 4 minutes of the song, you'll be able to start hearing, oh yeah, there is a reverb there, and that reverb is probably maybe 1 second. Well, if you hear a 1 second reverb before it gets too low that you can't hear it anymore, along with all the other instruments, then the reality is that reverb setting for that snare drum is probably a 3 second reverb, right? Because it doesn't just go for a second and stop. It's going to go for a second and get to a certain level that you don't hear it anymore, and it's going to keep dissipating, right? So when it comes to mixing your next song, maybe you put in a 3-second, reverb on the snare drum to start creating depth in that mix. Now, the next instrument to look at would be the hi-hat. And the reality is that drummers do not play a hi-hat at the exact same velocity with the exact same part of the stick in the exact same place every time, right? Their wrist is moving and it's going to hit at different angles, so it's going to hit at different parts of the stick. The different parts of the stick are going to hit different parts of the hi-hat at different velocities. So one of the biggest things that I hear with a lot of programmed drums, that's the biggest giveaway immediately for a poor production, bad drum programming, is the hi-hat just going over and over. There's no variation to it. So a simple thing to think of, when you're programming your drums, is to go into the velocities and just change the velocities on every hit. These programs are incredible now, where it'll be enough variation in that hi-hat sound that it'll sound more human. But another thing to think of when you're listening to the hi-hat is just the level. How does that hi-hat level compare to the vocal? Is it overpowering the vocal, or is it getting buried? Where does that hi-hat level sit? Also, where is it panned? What is the reverb like? These are some questions to ask. Is there depth to it, or is it just really dry and in your face, or is it like a with a little bit of a sizzle behind it? Another thing to think of is how the hi-hat's being used. Is it just a tight, or is it like something with a kind of a thing? Think of all the different sounds that you have, because there's so many samples out there, and how do these variations in samples on a hi-hat really make that drum sound less programmed and more human? So really start focusing in on that. And again, just listen to each section of the song. So do this with every instrument throughout the song. And it might take you 45 minutes or an hour to listen through every single instrument in every single section and just describe it. Think of the panning. Think of the effects that are added to it. And also, once you've, say, for example, let's go back to the kick drum. Once you've listened to the kick drum in an intro and a verse and a chorus, the rest of the time that you're listening to the song, you can actually start listening to how does the kick drum compare to, say, the bass guitar in level? How does the kick drum compare to the guitars? How does it compare to the vocal? Is the vocal here while the kick drum is really low, or is the kick drum around the same level as the vocal? These are also things to really think of when you're mixing your song, because they're going to play a vital role in really making your mixes sound more professional, because you're really listening to the depth and the spacing and the height and really the three-dimensional aspect of professional quality mixes. Now, we spent a lot of time talking about drums. I stayed there for a while on purpose, because drums to me are the first dead giveaway on a track that's never going to make it really to licensing opportunities. I assume you're following me because you want to learn more about licensing and sync opportunities. So if you want to get your music on TV shows, films, or commercials, it's really going to start with the foundation. The foundation of any track is really the rhythm, right? So it's going to start with the drums. And so we do have to pay attention to that. But the thing that's ultimately going to sell a vocal song is a vocal, okay? We can have a mediocre track with a great vocal and still be sold, but you can't have a great track with a bad vocal. That's not going to sell you. So you have to have a great vocal performance. And I want you to start listening to the vocals, and I want you to spend a lot of time listening to background vocals as well. And listening, again, like we were listening to the drums, listening to the depth, okay? You have a vocal track. It might sound, dry and in your face, but when you start listening into the song and critically listening to that song, you'll find, I'd say about 100% of the time, you'll find that there is reverb and there are delays behind that track, behind that vocal track, that gives it a nice, big, thick, round sound. That's what gives it that meatiness. It's not some little thin vocal. That's what gives it that depth and just draws you into it. So pay attention to the time-based effects that are on that vocal. Pay attention to the vocal level compared to all the other instruments. How does the vocal sit compared to the bass guitar, compared to the kick drum, compared to the rhythm guitars, compared to the acoustic guitar, compared to the piano? A lot of times, the reason why mixes don't get picked up are really because the levels are all jacked up. The vocals are up front. A vocalist obviously mixed it, wanted to hear the vocal up front, but they ignored all the other instruments. And the other instruments just kind of got buried and they just become this wash down here. Well, we need to make sure that the vocal actually sits in as another part of the track. And the track is built also around the vocal. You'll find that when you listen to professional records, the vocal isn't here. the track here. You know, the vocal is a part of the track like the other instruments are. All right. So critically listen to the vocal. Another thing to think about when you're listening to the vocal, when it gets to the chorus, does that vocal suddenly get a little bigger and a little thicker? You probably will find that's the case a lot of the time. How do they do that? A lot of the time, it's because the vocal was doubled. Okay. A fun thing to do when you have some time is to get on YouTube and you can type in isolated vocals for various artists and songs. You can find, you know, just the isolated vocal tracks for a lot of hit songs. And it's a lot of fun to do. And you can basically, they're stems, so you can hear all the delay and the reverb and the treatment that was put to them, put on them actually in the mix. So that's something to spend some time doing as well. You can just type in isolated vocal tracks. But pay a lot of attention to the actual depth and space of the vocals and also the background vocals. How are the vocals sitting? What is their panning? Let's listen into the actual track. All right. So you have a worksheet. It'll keep you honest through the whole process. You can write out information for every single track in every single section of the song. That'll really help you, keep tabs, and it'll give you a lot of ideas on your own productions moving forward. I know this process will help. Critical listening is so important to building your production and your mixing skills. All right. So enjoy this, have fun with it, and I'll see you soon. If you're interested in getting your songs into your favorite films, TV shows, commercials, trailers, and video games, you're going to want to check out the free guide below.